Hello YouTube, how's it going? This is the crossover and I'm back with another video. Today's going to be part 2 of my mock draft 2.0. So in the first video we covered picks 1 through 15 and today we are going to be covering picks 16 through 30. So I'm not going to talk too much, we're just going to hop right into it and continue from where we left off. So with the 16th pick in the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Atlanta Hawks selecting Wisconsin guard Johnny Davis. Now I think this pick is both a great blend of not only best player on the board, but also just fit as Atlanta desperately needs another two guard who can be a shot creator next to Trae Young, kind of take the ball out of his hands, kind of relieve some of the pressure, some of the burden that he does have with this Atlanta offense, while also holding his own defensively. I think Atlanta has a couple players on this team that are solid role players, but not necessarily anybody who can really, hold their own offensively in terms of creating their own shot as well as being a solid defender, right? They have some guys like, maybe DeAndre Hunter can potentially be that, but given his injury concerns, it's kind of derailed his career a little bit. And then also a player like Bogdan who can create for himself a good amount, but isn't necessarily a good defender. You're not that, and that's just not the case with Johnny Davis. Johnny Davis is a very good point of attack defender, very physical, will hold his own, and that's something that Atlanta just doesn't really have out the guard position. And then especially offensively, where he's just such a talented shot creator, able to get to his spots in the mid range at will. Nobody in Atlanta really has Johnny Davis's skill set, so I think he's going to be able to slide in next to Trae Young at the shooting guard spot, be a day two starter, and kind of be that secondary creator and secondary initiator that this Atlanta offense so desperately needs. With the 17th pick in the 2022 NBA draft, with their second selection in the first round, I have the Houston Rockets selecting Duke wing AJ Griffin Jr. Now, I know I got a lot of comments about AJ Griffin in my previous video simply because I had him sliding this low. And I think it's just a mixture of different things that kind of caused me to drop AJ Griffin as far as I did. I believe the injury concerns are a big red flag for me, just given how many ankle sprains and how many, concerning injuries he has had since his junior year in high school all the way to now, post his freshman year of college. Also, his athleticism looks kind of shot. He doesn't really look all that flexible when you watch him on the court. He has extremely stiff hips. I don't know if that's just a byproduct of some of the weight that he has put on. If you look at pictures from him, from his senior year of high school, when he was coming into Duke to now, he's obviously put on a lot of weight, not nearly as lean or as cut as he used to be. And I think maybe a common all those things combined together to really hamper his athleticism compared to what it was in high school when he was playing with RJ Davis at Winnipeg. And then when you just look at AJ Griffin as a defender, he's just really lacking in that area on the court. Really, all he's really offering you is floor spacing and some shot creation here and there, right? He can heat up and he can take over a game when he has to, which is impressive, but just everything else in this game is just kind of a red flag right now. And I decided to drop him out of the lottery simply because I just like a lot of other guys better than AJ Griffin at this point in the draft process. However, I think this is a great fit for Houston. They desperately need more floor spacers. Really, who was really a consistent floor spacer for Houston last year? Garrison Matthews. I mean, that's about it. Jayshawn Tate's a solid player, but he's not really spacing the floor. Jalen Green really had the ball in his hands a lot. Same thing with KPJ. Maybe Christian Wood. Right, so they would be getting with AJ a floor spacer for not only now but for the long term, and a guy who I think you could potentially slide some minutes at the three just because of how big AJ is right now. But I think he's definitely gonna have to cut off some of that weight, and I think just some of the injury concerns caused him to fall this far. And I think Houston definitely gets a steal with the former consensus top 10 pick, at least on my board. So yeah, with the 17th pick, I have the Houston Rockets selecting AJ Griffin Jr. With the 18th pick in the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Chicago Bulls selecting Duke center Mark Williams. Now, before I wasn't necessarily all that high on Mark Williams. I thought I from a number of games that I did watch, I think he struggled in terms of pick and roll coverages just with how big and lumbering he was. I did think at times in the ACC tournament he kind of got played off the floor. However, as the draft process has continued and moved along, I've slowly come to like Mark Williams more and more, and I think him landing at 18 for the Chicago Bulls is a very good pick, and a very good situation for both sides. Chicago really needs that defensive presence in the paint. Nikola Vucevic is a very solid offensive center. However, defensively, he's putrid. There's no sugarcoating it. He is an absolutely terrible defensive center, and he's an absolute liability. And when you have Zach LaVine, who's a very bad defender, and DeRozan, who's also a terrible defender out there, you have three strong negative defenders out there at all times. So I think Mark Williams is a guy who can come in and give Chicago, strong rim protection, very huge lumbering presence in the paint. His physical measurements were absolutely incredible at the combine. He's 7'2" with a 7'8" wingspan. I mean, that's just ridiculous. So he's going to be able to come in, provide Chicago with rim protection from day one, be a vertical spacer just with how big and long he is. And I think he's a guy who, Billy Donovan, as I state here, he's just so huge that I think he finally gives Chicago a body that they can put on, a Joel Embiid or a Giannis. And I'm not saying he's going to necessarily have success, but at least Mark Williams is a body, a guy who's physically comparable to those guys. So at least Chicago has someone that they can at least put on them. And I feel like Mark Williams fills up a major hole in the Chicago Bulls roster, just with that backup center being, that physical presence, and that kind of allows Chicago to kind of go about their offseason and fill out different holes on the roster. So yeah, Mark Williams to the Chicago Bulls at 18. Moving on to the 19th pick in the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Minnesota Timberwolves selecting Kansas wing Ochai Agbaji. Now, I think this is a pretty seamless fit. I believe I had Ochai going to the Timberwolves in my previous mock draft. And again, I think this is just an absolutely perfect fit. Minnesota is in dire need of someone on the perimeter, kind of like a smaller wing, or like like a two that can be, a two-way impact player for them. And I think Ochai definitely fits that bill. He's one of the most versatile point of attack defenders in this class. There's possessions for Kansas where he would be guarding the ball handler from half court when they're bringing the ball down, and then he'll switch out onto a wing, off a dribble handoff, kind of swarm them, kind of make them feel uncomfortable. Then, they'll call for a ball screen from the big man, and then Ochai will kind of have to switch onto the big man, and then the big man will kind of try to post Ochai up, and then he just can't because Ochai is just too strong. So I love Ochai's fit for Minnesota. Him with Jared Vanderbilt and Jaden McDaniels. Just three very long, athletic, laterally quick defenders for Minnesota to have next to Cat and Anthony Edwards. And then also on the offensive side of the floor, Ochai has such a quick trigger with his jump shot that he's just going to be able to get up shots in a hurry, especially when it's going to be open, since Cat and Ant-Man are going to demand so much attention from the defense. So, I mean, yeah, this is just such a seamless fit, real two-way impact player who should be, again, an impact player for Minnesota from day one as soon as he steps onto an NBA court. So, yeah, Ochai to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Moving on to the 20th pick of the 2022 NBA draft, where the San Antonio Spurs, with their second selection in the first round, select NC State guard Terquavion Smith. Now, Terquavion is a player who I was pretty late to the hype train on. If you guys have followed my channel, any of my recurring viewers, you guys would know that Terquavion was the player that I most recently made an individual scouting report on, and he's one of my favorite players in this class, just with his length and his three-point shot creation. He led the ACC in threes attempted this year, total threes attempted, and shot them at a 37% clip. 8 threes per game is absolutely insane for a freshman, a 19-year-old freshman, especially a freshman with the length that Terquavion has. And he's also a very good on-ball defender as well. So he's a very intriguing prospect, had a very good showing at the draft combine, and I think he's a perfect fit for what San Antonio needs. San Antonio, as I stated here, was the 25th ranked team in terms of threes attempted. So Terquavion could step in right away and offer some three-point shot creation, which is something that this team desperately needs. And I think he has the upside offensively to eventually develop into this team's one of their long-term starting guards. And I think he's a perfect complement to DeJounte Murray in the half court, given again his three-point shot creation. And he's also a very solid point of attack defender. As I mentioned before, he's able to overwhelm offensive players with his length, which is something that, again, he fits right into this Spurs defense with all of their on-ball defenders like DeJounte Murray and Devin Vassell. Keldon Johnson is a decent defender as well. Jakob Poeltl's a very solid rim protector, right? They just have a lot of very solid on-ball defenders, and I think Terquavion can slide in and be this team's starting shooting guard from day one, and I think over time can develop into San Antonio's their focus, or one of their main offensive center figures in their offense at that guard spot. So along with him and Nikola Jovic, San Antonio is really banking on developing some star potential on the offensive side of the ball. Moving on to the 21st pick of the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Denver Nuggets selecting Duke wing Wendell Moore Jr. Now, Wendell Moore Jr. is one of the more underrated prospects. In my opinion, I'm much higher on him than the consensus. Usually you see him ranked in, the lower to mid 30s on most people's big boards. However, I'm very high on Wendell Moore. I don't understand why the consensus isn't higher. He's just such a complete player, such an all-around prospect, very good facilitator, can be, that secondary initiator for you, can space the floor, can tack off the dribble, very efficient around the rim, very solid point of attack defender as well, and has shown some upside as a weak side defender in terms of, being able to navigate screens and communicate with his teammates and whatnot, kind of tell them, where to go, kind of blow up, off ball actions, which is something that I think the Denver Nuggets could really benefit from. They don't really have necessarily a lot of role players on the wing that can help them on both sides of the floor. And again, I think Wendell Moore can do that. I think he can give this Denver Nuggets team somebody who doesn't have to be so Jokic centric in terms of them creating or scoring buckets. I think Wendell Moore is a guy who can come in. Again, he's going to be a guy who can space the floor for Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. and Nikola Jokic and whatnot. But he's really going to be a guy who can handle the ball on his own and really do something on his own. And that's just something that the Denver Nuggets really don't have outside of a couple guys on this roster. And then again, defensively, which I think is this Denver Nuggets team. This is what I think is the Denver Nuggets' biggest weakness, is just that they don't really have a lot of perimeter defenders on this team. So I think Wendell Moore is going to be a guy who can be a very valuable and very is going to be a guy who can be a very valuable and very helpful role player for this Denver Nuggets team as they look to make a playoff push next season. Moving on to the 22nd pick in the 2022 NBA draft with their first selection in the first round, I have the Memphis Grizzlies selecting Santa Clara wing Jalen Williams. Now, Jalen Williams is the first player in this mock draft that I have not done an individual scouting report on. Just to give a quick brief synopsis of Jalen Williams as a player. He's a 6'6" wing with a 7'2" wingspan, elite physical profile, who's a very adept ball handler, is pretty shifty, is able to get to his spots on the court, can overwhelm defenders just with how big he is on the court. Very smooth and talented creator with the ball in his hands, can score from all three levels on the court, and he's really helped his draft stock with his performance at the combine, and is the reason that I have him going so high at 22. How he fits on this Memphis Grizzlies roster, I think he's much more of a long-term project for them. A guy who has star upside, you can reason, again, with his physical intent, with his physical profile, and just with his scoring repertoire, and just with his offensive skill set. I think he's a guy who Taylor Jenkins and the crew can develop over time, kind of be somebody that they keep off the bench, add to their wing depth, their two guard depth, even though I really love this Memphis Grizzlies roster, obviously who doesn't, I don't think they have a lot of players with, real star upside. I love Desmond Bane, but I wouldn't necessarily call Desmond Bane a star. And I think they really need more creators around Ja. So I think Jalen Williams would give this team that. And as I stated here, I think he would just be a very solid piece off the bench in the meantime as he develops over the long term in his career, hopefully into a star for the Grizzlies as a backcourt mate for Ja. But for the short term, I think he's a guy who can give this Memphis Grizzlies unit some self-creation and some on-ball scoring. With the 23rd pick in the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Brooklyn Nets selecting Ohio State wing slash big EJ Liddell. Now, I would have really liked for Brooklyn to get a center here at 23, but out of the centers remaining, I couldn't really convince myself in, Brooklyn really reaching for any of them, so I elected to go with one of the better wings left on the board here, and that is EJ Liddell, who I think is a great fit for this Brooklyn Nets roster, as he is a very versatile off-ball defender. As I stated in my EJ Liddell individual scouting report, I think that his on-ball defense is a bit overstated. I think that he's versatile, don't get me wrong, but he doesn't necessarily have the lateral quickness to really stay in front of, most guards, the best of the best of guards. And he's not necessarily the biggest of wings to, really bang down low with true bigs, but he's a very versatile off-ball piece that, he does a decent job playing passing lanes, does a good job communicating, is also a guy who's a great weak side rim protector, which is something that could bring that, which is a part of his skill set that will allow him to bring value to the Brooklyn Nets from day one as soon as he steps into the facility. And I think he should be an immediate contributor for the Brooklyn Nets defense just because of his versatility on that side of the floor. And then also offensively, he's a very efficient floor spacer, has a very nice shot, didn't take too many threes at Ohio State, but I think again that was just a product of the Ohio State system, as I kind of mentioned with my Malachi Branham segment. Both players didn't necessarily get up that many threes despite both being very good shooters, which is kind of strange, but college basketball for you. But EJ Liddell is a very efficient. He's a guy who's going to be a pick and pop threat. Who's also pretty athletic around the rim. Can be an above the rim finisher as well, and also is a guy who has some secondary playmaking, can hit players across the court, who can make cross court passes. So again, this is a very versatile piece. We're talking about, really, in my opinion, EJ Liddell reminds me of a player like Grant Williams with some secondary playmaking, and obviously that's a player that would be an immediate contributor for any playoff team. And as you guys can imagine, that would be a player that the Brooklyn Nets will love to get their hands on to add to their supporting cast next to Kyrie, KD, and Ben Simmons. Moving on to the 24th pick of the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Milwaukee Bucks selecting overtime elite guard John Montero. Now, I know a lot of people don't necessarily know too much about John. I know that I made a scouting report a while ago now, but I really like John, and in my opinion, he's my favorite point guard in this class, just because I believe in his three-point shot creation as well as his facilitating as a package. I think he's just one of the more gifted offensive players in this class, and he's very young, dominated in overtime elite, dominated overseas as well. It's really just dominated every level of competition he's faced up until this point in his career. So I really love John, and I think he's a perfect fit for this Milwaukee Bucks team. We saw in this playoffs that without one of their big three on the court, Milwaukee, their roster is pretty barren. I don't think the Bucks front office necessarily did a great job surrounding their big three with a lot of talent this offseason. Letting PJ Tucker go was a big miss. So I think adding a player like John, a guy who doesn't need or doesn't have to rely on Chris or Giannis or Drew to kind of get his own offense, is a win. I think it's a big win for Milwaukee here, and in my opinion, they're getting one of the best. They're my favorite point guard in this class, and this is a team that ranked last in passes per game this previous season. So getting an extremely gifted playmaker like John is exactly what this Bucks offense and just this Bucks team in general needs. Moving on to the 25th pick in the 2022 NBA draft, with their third selection in the first round, I have the San Antonio Spurs selecting Stanford wing Harrison Ingram. Now, I know a lot of people aren't necessarily huge Harrison Ingram fans, and I mean, I kind of get it. A guy who's not necessarily super athletic and kind of struggles with his three ball. However, I mean, he's just one of the more versatile players in this class. So young, and he's just such a winning player. Harrison Ingram just makes a lot of winning plays, has just such a high IQ, very versatile, off-ball defender, and I think he's just a perfect fit for the San Antonio Spurs team. When you look at their first two selections that I had them going with, you go with Nikola Jovic, who could potentially develop into their offensive centerpiece moving forward. And then a guy like Terquavion Smith, who in my individual scouting report for Terquavion, I kind of compared him to a lankier Fred VanVleet. That's a potential ceiling for Terquavion, just in terms of the kind of player or the kind of play style that he has. So with Harrison Ingram, he's the perfect complementary piece to some of those guys. Great playmaker, very high IQ player, knows how to move without the ball, great rebounder, has a great nose for the ball. Is just going to make a lot of winning plays. Very good weak side defender, and a very good strong side defender as well. Plays passing lanes decently. So we're talking about a guy who's a perfect complementary piece to pretty much all of San Antonio's other players. You know, they have a lot of really good on-ball defenders, as I previously mentioned, and Harrison Ingram fits those guys as being a very good off-ball defender. And then they already have guys to dominate the ball like DeJounte Murray and now Terquavion and now Nikola Jovic. So now you have Harrison Ingram in there kind of to keep the ball moving, kind of to score without the ball in his hands, you know, get himself open and knock down the occasional open three as well, and has a good nose for the ball in terms of, you know, grabbing rebounds and whatnot. So I think Harrison Ingram is the perfect complementary piece for this San Antonio Spurs team, and he's so young, and he can continue to grow as a player with that high IQ of his. So Harrison Ingram to the San Antonio Spurs at 25. Moving on to the 26th pick in the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Dallas Mavericks selecting Wake Forest wing/big Jake LaRavia. Now, he's another player that I haven't necessarily done an individual scouting report on. However, Jake is a very versatile two-way forward that can guard a multitude of positions on ball, from guards to wings to matching up with bigs. Very good rebounder as well. Solid handle, can push the ball after grabbing a defensive rebound, can really get out in transition as well. Talented finisher, has a very smooth shot at 6'8", and is a very good facilitator as well. I think Wake Forest was best when Jake LaRavia had the ball in his hands, and I think he could be a day one contributor for this Dallas Mavericks team, specifically with his defense. You know, he's another guy. He can add to their multitude of wings that can guard multiple positions, just bolstering the part of the team that's already a strength, and as well as be a very gifted shooter. And I think he can just add another wrinkle in this Dallas offense by being another role player that doesn't necessarily have to be spoon-fed by Luka in order to make plays. He's a guy who can hit cutters, attack closeouts, score at the rim, and can find open shooters. So I think he's a great fit on both sides of the floor for the Dallas Mavericks. With the 27th pick in the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Miami Heat selecting Kentucky guard Ty Washington. Now, Ty is another player similar to AJ Griffin that I kind of fell out of love with as the draft process continued along compared to where I stand now compared to, 2 months ago. And that's not to say that I don't like Ty. I still like his strengths. I think he's an elite mid-range shooter. I love his poise as a pick and roll creator, not only for himself but for others. I think his finishing at the rim is okay. I think it could need some work, and I like his three-point shot. I think it could need some work as well. As I mentioned kind of in his individual scouting report, I think his shot form is a little his guide hand kind of flares out a little bit, and I think the release is a little low, but it's consistent on pretty much everything. So I think there's room to grow. There's reason to believe that his shot will continue to grow. And for me, I think this pick for Miami was simply just BPA, best player available. Just letting Ty fall this far, I think this is a steal for Miami. They don't necessarily have a backup point guard, and with Kyle Lowry continuing to age and not be able to carry an offense the way he did, I feel like Miami can kind of groom Ty Washington, allow him to heal, all his injuries. I feel that a big reason on why he wasn't necessarily great in the latter half of the season is just because all those injuries kind of derailed him. So just allow him to kind of chill on the second unit, rehab all his injuries, get right, and then, in that Eric Spoelstra system, just continue to develop Ty Washington, who I had as a former lottery talent. So I think this is just the best player on the board, and I think this is a great steal and pickup for the Miami Heat. With the 28th pick in the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Golden State Warriors selecting Arizona guard Dalen Terry. Now, Dalen Terry is yet another player that I haven't necessarily done an individual scouting report on. However, he's a player that I really like. He was the floor general for this Arizona team that was so dominant this year. 6'7" guard, versatile point of attack defender, active in passing lanes, can knock down open shots. I feel like that's a part of his game that he needs to continue to work on. However, I think he has some upside there, can attack closeouts, very patient player, patient playmaker, and I feel like he's just a perfect fit for Golden State and exactly what they need. I feel that there's a very good chance that he could go back to college and potentially become a higher pick than what he is projected right now. I feel like if he has a good season next year, he could very well be a top 20 pick in next year's draft. However, if he elects to stay in this year's draft, I feel like this is a perfect landing spot for him. Golden State is in dire need of a backup point guard. I know that a lot of people want them to go with a backup center. However, I feel that James Wiseman is going to be coming back next year, so there isn't necessarily a need to draft a backup center. However, they desperately need a backup point guard. I don't think Jordan Poole is a point guard, and Dalen Terry would give the Golden State team everything they need in a backup point guard. Positional size, boom, check. He can not only play the point guard, but he can play on and off the ball. He's a table setter. He can set up your offense efficiently, and you wouldn't necessarily need him to go out there and be, this grand scorer simply because he'd be playing next to Curry and Clay and Jordan Poole off the bench, and potentially Kuminga if he breaks out offensively, and Moses Moody. And, you're hoping to see James Wiseman continue to grow on the offensive side of the floor since you drafted him with the second overall pick. So Dalen Terry would be in a perfect situation in Golden State, no pressure on him, just continue to round out his game and really just be a table setter for all the players or all the other offensive weapons that he would have around him at his disposal to kind of get them the ball. And then, as I mentioned before, with his positional versatility as a 6'7" wing, I think it's a perfect fit for Golden State. There were some other point guards that I was looking towards, but I think Dalen Terry and Golden State, in my opinion, is just a match made in heaven. Moving on to the 29th pick in the 2022 NBA draft, I have the Memphis Grizzlies with their second selection in the first round, electing to go with Notre Dame guard Blake Wesley. Now, I'm not the biggest Blake Wesley fan. However, I love his potential fit long-term for the Memphis Grizzlies, as Tyus Jones is looking like he's going to get a pretty hefty contract for another team in this offseason. He's the most statistically efficient point guard in the league. So I believe that he's most likely going to be gone. So Memphis filling that backup point guard spot in the draft is a very likely scenario for them, and I have them going with Blake Wesley. Now, Blake Wesley isn't necessarily a full-time point guard right now. However, I believe he's a guy who Memphis can kind of develop another long-term project for them. They would add guys after this draft. They would have Jalen Williams, Zaire Williams, and also now Blake Wesley, who's a plus athlete, very good measurement, very good physical profile for a guard. And I think he has real upside as a pick and roll creator and facilitator and a shot maker as well. And again, he's a very long-term project for this Memphis Grizzlies team. However, I love his potential fit, and I feel that if Blake Wesley is able to reach his ceiling for Memphis, you could potentially even play him alongside Ja, just have two athletic guards out there. And if he's not a perfect fit, then you have a really good trade piece to move forward. But again, I love Taylor Jenkins. I love his developmental. I love his developmental staff. I love the job that they've done so far for Memphis, developing all these role players and getting there and giving them a prospect like Blake Wesley, who they could potentially develop into that backup guard spot. And again, as I previously mentioned, if he outplays that backup point guard spot and is not the best fit next to Ja, then that's a very good trade piece that Memphis could have, a couple years, 4 or 5 years down the road. Moving on to the final pick in my second mock draft, I have the Oklahoma City Thunder electing to go with Arizona center Christian Koloko with their third selection in the first round. And Koloko is another prospect that I haven't necessarily done an individual scouting report on. However, he's very raw offensively, doesn't have great touch around the rim right now, not a great free throw shooter. I know he did have a really good showing at the 3-point shooting drill at the combine, but still needs some work on that area as well. However, he's an excellent defensive prospect, great rim protector, and has the potential to switch out onto guards, solid pick and roll defender as well. So I think that's where that's what's really propelling him this high, and I think that he would be the day one starter for Oklahoma at the center spot. He would really be their defensive anchor. I think after this draft, Oklahoma would have his starting lineup of Shaedon Sharpe, Josh Giddey, Jeremy Sohan, and Christian Koloko. A lot of versatility, a lot of players that can thrive off-ball movement. I would expect the ball to be moving a lot in that lineup. You would kind of have Shea and Shaedon kind of dominate the offense while Josh Giddey kind of plays off them, and Jeremy Sohan can keep the ball moving. Really good defensive prospect as well, and then Christian Koloko to kind of hold the fort down. And even though he's not a great offensive prospect, he would have a plethora of different players that would just be spoon feeding him the ball around the rim with Jeremy Sohan and Shea and Josh Giddey. So I think it's a perfect fit for Christian Koloko, and I really like this draft class for the Oklahoma City Thunder. And that finally concludes my mock draft 2.0. Let me know what you guys think about my mock draft in the comment section. I know for part one, comment section were not pretty. You guys were definitely coming at me for a lot of my picks. However, I appreciate all the discussion. I love to just talk about the draft, talk about all these prospects. So let me know what you guys think about all my selections in the comment section. Let me know what you got, who you guys think, which of these teams came out the best out of this mock draft. I think the Rockets definitely got value. I think the Spurs definitely got value. And I think OKC had a pretty good draft too. So aside from that, that's the end of the video, guys. Let me know what you guys think about the mock draft in the comment section below. Please share the channel with a friend. If you are subscribed, and if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. I want to keep growing the channel, keep growing the community that we have here. And again, aside from that, that's the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. And peace. Have a blessed day and take care.